So you'll have to approve it. I think there's a little approval screen that you all get. And then I will share the recording with you tomorrow. And same thing on the second class, I'll share the recording with you. So just in case you need to rewatch it, you're more than welcome to. Put me on fast forward. Was there anything on that list that you all couldn't find?
I think I found everything okay.
I think my only question was on the light meter part. I think on my camera it's just called metering mode. Does that sound right? Yeah. Okay.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's had 3 choices: whole center or spot metering.
Correct.
Does that sound right? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So you all did pretty good. Okay, and I am showing that we're 1 minute after, correct?
Mhm.
For you all?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start. And then if Bonnie comes in and Pam comes in, then we'll just welcome them in. So thank you all very much for coming and for joining me for class. I hope you enjoy it today. And what I'm going to do is we have this class period, and then you have homework. And then you have second class period next week, same time, same place. And then I won't see you again after that, but you still have another homework assignment after that. And so it just gives you it gives you an opportunity to practice what I've taught you. So hopefully we're going to get you where you need to be, at least for this beginning phase. You cannot learn photography in one sitting. And so you're going to at least be able to understand some information tonight. And then second class, you will have put your hands on it, and you will have practiced a little bit, and you should be in a little bit better shape after second class. And then if you notice, all throughout June, I have lots and lots of different classes, from really basic ones to more advanced. Just jump in and start taking another class. Alicia was just telling me she's related to a photography student that I've had and known for the last 30 years. And Alicia's aunt has just come in and taken class after class after class after class, and she's a good photographer. So it's one of these things where you have to come back and you have to keep practicing. You cannot learn it all at one time. But what we're going to learn today is we are going to learn about your light meter, what it means, f-stop, what that means, shutter speed, what that means, and ISO and what that means. And with your light meter, your f-stop, your shutter speed, and your ISO, you can photograph anything. So you have to learn those 4 components of your camera, and then you can start putting them all together to capture the images that you want. If you know light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO, then when this red and green macaw flies by, then you're going to be ready to photograph it. Because when that lioness raises her head up out of the grass, she is not going to stop and wait so that you get your act together and you figure out whether it's light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, or ISO that you need to move, because she's not waiting for you. And the same thing when the tall-masted sailing ship comes through the Venice harbor. Y'all can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. It's not going to wait for you. And same thing with the Milky Way. It's up in the sky, but you have to know whether it's your light meter that's the most important thing you move, your f-stop, your shutter speed, or your ISO. But once you learn those 4 components of your camera and how they all fit together, then when you see something like cute little kids across the table from you and you want to take a picture of them, then you'll be ready to do it. So you've got to learn those 4 components, light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO, to be able to capture creative shots like the cars moving in Cuba, or even the solar eclipse coming up next October, not this coming October, but next October through Texas. Or if you want to do something like the Aurora Borealis, easy thing to photograph, but you've got to know which one's the most important thing, light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, or ISO. or get creative and have fun, like photographing through a crystal ball. I've got the crystal ball class coming up in June as well. It's a lot of fun to photograph through a crystal ball. Very different, and it just makes the world look upside down and backwards, so it's a lot of fun. So from simple things to just photographing your cat or your pet, all you've got to know is light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. And you'll notice that those are the 4 components that we're going to talk about tonight. Okay, so sit back, relax, and I will warn you ahead of time, photography is technical. Photography is not creative. Creative comes later. We've got to master the technicals. And so don't freak out on me, and don't give up on me either, or give up on yourself, because this is just it's a technical thing, and we've got to get the technicals down so that we can get the creatives later on. So don't panic, ask questions. You're not the only one who's ever tried to learn photography. I will also warn you, because I've been digging through everybody's camera manuals, and it's interesting to see how the camera manuals are all situated. The camera manufacturers are assuming that you will never learn light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO. And so that's why you have all these little automated things, because they're assuming you're never, ever going to learn it. But I'm going to teach you these technical things so that then if you want to later on, you can move to the little creative stuff that your camera has. But I think you'll find that once you've learned light meter, f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO by my method, you won't want to go into the little, what I call hokey modes that your camera has. So understand that I'm going to make it hard for you. But once you learn it, you've learned it. So be patient with yourself, ask questions, and just realize you're not the first one who's ever tried to learn photography. So I'll get you there. You'll get there. Be patient with yourself. Okay. So let's start at the very beginning. First of all, you have this little thing. Most of y'all have a flip out screen on your camera. We are not going to use the screen in this position. We're going to flip it back, and we're going to put it back against the back of the camera. You are going to use the viewfinder to look through the viewfinder. So everybody's going to, Tracy, you've got a one-piece unit, but you're still going to use that viewfinder, okay? But everybody else, you all have got the, Alicia and Monica, you all both have the Canon Rebels. And so you all are going to flip that screen back, put it flat up against the back of the camera, and you're going to use the viewfinder to look through it. We also have this little tiny little dial right up here by the viewfinder. Did you all find this?
Yeah.
It's called a diopter. And this is to adjust the view through the viewfinder for your eye prescription. So if we were face to face and I picked up your camera and I put my eye up to the viewfinder, I may not be able to see clearly through the viewfinder. So that little diopter, did you all adjust it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you adjust it by just looking through the viewfinder, pushing the button halfway down. It brings the lights on inside the viewfinder. And when everything inside the viewfinder, all the little numbers and things are crisp and clear, you know that you've put the diopter properly for your eyes. If your eyes get tired, you might have to do a little minor adjustment, but that's why that little diopter is right there. Okay. Tracy, here's your camera. So your camera is your Panasonic Lumix, and this is a really, really cool camera. Very, very neat camera. And just in case I don't mention this, do you remember where you said you had a lot of trouble getting clear pictures with it? It's got a zoom on it to 1200 millimeters, which is a tremendous amount of zoom. So anytime you're zoomed all the way out, you have to have at least a 1200th of a second shutter speed to stop your own body moving the camera.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah,
I wondered if I was just trying to use that long zoom way too much.
it's just trying to
That's it.
use the long zoom. So if you ever find, because you said you're leaving for Costa Rica, so if you find that you're using that long zoom, and it is a nice zoom, but you've got to have at least a 1200th of a second shutter speed just to stop your own body vibrations. Okay. So you've got pretty easy controls on the camera. And then on the back of the camera, Tracy, you can get this display panel, right?
I have seen that, yes.
Okay, good, good, good. That comes with your DISP button right here. And when I talk about light meter in just a little bit, this is your light meter icon right there.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. You're welcome. And then up on the top, you have these FN buttons, the
Mhm.
function buttons. And remember that those can be programmed for different features. So once you get to where you feel the camera and you know the camera a little bit better, you might want to reprogram some of those buttons.
Okay, I did see
Okay.
that in the manual. I thought, I'm not
Yeah.
going there at all yet.
Yeah, that's right. Not yet. And then your menus in the back, you've got pretty simple menus just by pushing your menu button. And then you've probably learned how to do this already. Scroll up and down and just set push the set button anytime you want to set that aspect. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and then the 6D is Bonnie's, and Bonnie's not here tonight, so I'm just going to talk as if she was here. Bonnie, this is the back display panel of your camera. You get this by pushing the info button. And then Bonnie, this is the top of your camera, and this is where your autofocus is and your drive and your ISO. And here is your light meter button right here, Bonnie. And then Pam, your camera looks almost exactly like Bonnie's. So Bonnie and Pam, you two are not here tonight. So I'm going to talk to you all together to get this screen to come up on the back of your camera. You're going to push the info button 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. And then to change any items on this back display screen, you're going to push your Q button. And then you can either move around this display screen with this toggle or this large dial right here. Bonnie and Pam, also, you have to make sure that your camera is unlocked right down here on the bottom. Do not lock it. So you want to make sure that it's unlocked. And then Pam, yours looks like this, and that's your shutter speed dial right there. And then one more time for Bonnie and Pam, push the info button 3 times to get this screen to show up. Press your Q button to move or to select one of these items. Select one of these items with either the dial or the toggle, and then make sure that the camera on the back is unlocked. Okay, Rebels. Okay, Alicia, here you go. Okay, so you've got a pretty simple Canon Rebel, and Monica and Alicia, you all both have Canon Rebels. So you've got a lot of similarities between the 2 models. And then Alicia, this is what yours looks like on the back panel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, good. Okay, and you got that by pressing the the button right here. And then to activate any of these areas, right, any of these icons right around through here, you will push either this button, this button, this button, or you've also got some buttons up on the top that you can push for your ISO, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
And
right
then
there.
see both of you, Monica and Alicia, you see where this AV plus minus button is right here?
Mhm.
You see that? So you're going to push that button with your thumb and hold it in, and you're going to rotate the front dial, and that's going to change your f-stop.
Oh, okay.
So to change your f-stop, you mash it with that plus minus button with your thumb. And then while you're mashing it, you rotate your front dial.
All right.
Okay. And then also, Monica, on your camera, see this black display panel? Is that the one you have? Yay. Okay, good. So just in case you didn't, there are 2 different display panels on your camera.
Yes,
Yeah. But I like that black one better.
much better.
Much better. Yes. Just gives you more information. And then with your camera also, you have, wait a second, where is it? So you don't have that plus minus button in the middle of the back display panel, do you?
No, my old Canon did.
Yeah, but this
Because I
one
have
doesn't.
yeah, I went from the original Rebel. I just upgraded to this about 2 months ago.
Okay, okay, okay. So this one does not have that plus minus button, which I think is really irritating. But so it means that to change your f-stop, we're going to be pushing yours is touch screen on the back, so you're going to be pushing it. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, good. Okay, super. And let me see. And I also noticed on yours that you also have a lock button there, and make sure that that lock button is not set also, because otherwise you can't use this back toggle or that back dial. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because it'll lock. If I lock it, it just locks down everything.
It locks down everything. Exactly. So make sure that it's not locked. Okay. Okay. So we're good there. And then let me see, up on the top of yours, Monica, here is your ISO button right here. And then here's your display button instead of it being on the back of the camera. Okay. Just a quick little run through on everybody's camera. Okay. Now let's talk about light meter. And y'all have all got your hand out, right? Okay, good. So let's talk about light meter. I want you to turn your camera on, if you would, please, and look through the viewfinder and push the button halfway down, the shutter button halfway down. And you see the little, everybody's in the M mode up on the top. The M mode up on top, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Okay. So when you look through your viewfinder, hey, Bonnie, how are you?
And my apologies.
That's okay. I've been talking to you. So on the recording, you'll get what I was talking to you about. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So if you would look through your viewfinder, and I want you to push your button halfway down. Everybody's in the M mode on the top of the camera. Correct?
Yep.
Yep, shake your head up and down, because that's the only way I know that you're there. Or I'll say yes. And we're not in the M mode on your lens. We're on the M mode on the top of the camera. That's the manual mode. You are totally, completely in charge of the camera at this point. So when you're looking through the viewfinder in the M mode and you push your shutter button halfway down, you are going to notice a scale that looks like this in the bottom of the viewfinder. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah, good, good. Tracy, that's what we're looking at inside yours. Good. Okay. This is your light meter scale. So this scale in the bottom of your camera, Bonnie, is yours in the bottom of your camera or up against the right-hand side? Bottom. Okay, good. Because Pamela, yours might be over on your left-hand side. So she's not here with us right now. So this light meter is trying to talk to you. It's trying to say, if you will put me in the middle, I will give you a perfectly exposed image. So that light meter is how your camera is trying to talk to you, except there are not only one light meter inside your camera, but there are 3 different kinds of light meters inside your camera, if not 4 different kinds of light meters. So let me explain to you what a light meter is and what it does, okay? So put your camera down for right now. And by the way, here's your light meter icon, Tracy, right here. And then everybody else, all you Canon users, here's your light meter icon right here on the back of your camera. Okay, so put your camera down for one moment and let me explain to you what your light meter does and what it is. Back in the 1950s, photographers prior to the 1950s, in the 1950s, had to hold a handheld light meter out in front of them and point it at their subject. And then they had to make some changes on that. And then they had to look at it. And then they had to go back to their camera and make changes there. So that handheld light meter that photographers used to have separately from their camera, in the 1950s, engineers put it inside the camera. So you do not need a handheld light meter. You will never need a handheld light meter unless you do very complicated studio work. I have my father's handheld light meter from back in the 50s, and it's right there with his slide rule, you know, and they're both equally as antiquated. So they still function and they still have a role in the world, but we just don't need them anymore. So that light meter went inside your camera. And what that light meter does is it reads the light coming through the front lens. So when you pick your camera up and you point it at something, the light meter reads the light coming through the front of the lens. And then it shows that little scale and it tells you whether you need to make any adjustments in the f-stop or the shutter speed. So that's what that light meter is trying to tell you. In the old days, 1950s, we had one light meter, and that was called a center weighted light meter. It's on your handout, center weighted light meter. And what it did was it read all the light in the entire scene and averaged it. And then it gave a weighted average to what was right in the middle of the frame, because that's where your subject was. But by averaging, we get sort of muddy colors, as if in this picture of this shrimp boat, what would happen if you mixed white paint with black paint? You'd end up with gray. And that's pretty much what a center weighted light meter did, is it was just sort of a mush of the colors. It wasn't a real precise blending. So the center weighted light meter, all of you all have it, but we will never use it because it's the oldest light meter that your camera manufacturer has. And then in the 1980s, early 1980s, engineers came up with a brand new type of light meter. And it only read the light in that little spot right there. Totally ignored the sun, totally ignored the dark area right there. It only read the area right there in the center of the frame. And this was called a spot meter if you were a Nikon user. And Tracy Lumex now calls it spot. Nikon got to the copyright office first and got to call it spot. So Canon had to call it partial. So you Canon users, this is your partial light meter. Tracy, this is your spot light meter, because everybody coming after Canon and Nikon got to call it spot. So Canon has stubbornly called it spot since then. I mean, partial. So you Canon users, this is called your partial meter. Tracy, this is called your spot meter. And it only reads this spot. It ignores the sun back there. It ignores the shade right there. And it only reads that one spot. Now, this was pretty revolutionary when it came out, because that means that the sun in this picture didn't interfere with the exposure. It means that the shadow area didn't interfere with the exposure. And this was not the best place to use the spot meter, but where you would use a spot meter is if you had a performer on a stage in a spotlight, black stage, spotlight. If you push the button, rotated the dial and moved your camera to spot meter, and then put the spot, that center spot, on the performer, dialed in your f-stop, dialed in your shutter speed, and balanced your light meter like I'm going to show you in just a little bit, then your performer would come out perfectly exposed, but the area of the stage would be black. So I worked my way through college as a baby photographer at Kmart and Walmart in the old days. And we started photographing children against solid black backgrounds and children against solid white backgrounds. And if you've got any old pictures from that era, you might know what I'm talking about. But what we did was we used a spot meter on the kid's face. And no matter what color the kid was, the face came out perfectly exposed and the background stayed black or the background stayed white. So spot meter allows us to photograph a really, really bright subject against a really, really dark background, or a really, really dark subject against a really, really light background. But it's a lot of contrast. So we don't photograph things like that very often. So we're not going to use your spot or your partial meter very much. We might only use this maybe 1% of the time. So we're just not going to use your spot or your partial meter very much. But then in the 1990s with autofocus cameras, all the camera manufacturers came out with a new type of light meter. And this is called evaluative if you are a Canon user. And Tracy, this is your multi, if I'm not mistaken. Is it multi on you? You're muted, Tracy. That's okay.
I've got whole, center, or spot, so I'm guessing this is whole.
So it's
Yeah.
your whole. Yeah.
Okay.
So Canon's, it's called evaluative. And then Tracy on your Lumex, it's called whole. And what this light meter is doing is it's reading that section of the frame and averaging everything in it. It reads that segment of the frame and averages everything in it. It reads that segment of the frame and averages everything in it. It reads that segment of the frame and averages everything in it. And then it reads that segment of the frame and averages everything in it. And so what the evaluative or the whole light meter is doing is it's reading various segments of the frame and then averaging the light inside those various segments. If you've got a camera that's really very modern, so within the last couple of years, then you might not have 5 segments, you might have 64 segments. And a camera like Bonnie's, Bonnie, you've got the 6D, right? Yeah, you've got the 6D.
Yes, ma'am.
A camera like Bonnie's knows that there's a sun up in the top, a bright area at the top, and shadows down at the bottom, and it knows how to weigh those against each other. And so we're going to use your whole or your evaluative light meter, whole for Tracy, evaluative for everybody else, about 99% of the time. And that's because the light meter technology has gotten so good that 99% of the time that evaluative or that whole light meter is going to read the light adequately for us. So most of the time it's going to work for us. So that's where we're going to leave our camera set for right now. And let me give you an example of what the picture would look like with one light meter and without the light meter. So this photo was taken with the evaluative light meter, or the whole light meter as Tracy's camera is calling it. So it's reading all of the light in the entire frame. It's doing its little internal stuff that we don't even know what it's doing. And then I have done one other thing, and I'll explain what that is in a later, because right now it doesn't make any sense to you. So that's where I get the silhouette of the shrimp boat. But if I moved to my spot or my partial, where it's only reading that one circle right in the middle of the frame, then this is what my picture would look like. But in both cases, my light meter scale is right in the middle. But this one, me, the person with the brain, has told the camera, the machine, to use the spot or the partial light meter. And that's exactly what it did. When I see the scale on the bottom and the scale is in the middle and the scale is balanced, then this is the picture it gave me. When I'm on the evaluative or the whole light meter, and then the scale's right in the middle, this is the picture that it gave me. So you, the one with the brain, have to be able to look at your scene from now on and think, is my evaluative or my whole light meter going to do what I need it to do? Or maybe I need to move to my spot meter. So once again, that spot or that partial meter, we're only going to use that if we have a very contrasty subject against a black background or against a white background. So otherwise, our evaluative or our whole light meter can take care of it most of the time for us. So if you see a scene like this, you have to ask yourself, do I need to move? Do I need to push that button and rotate the dial and move to spot meter and use this to photograph the barn owl against the black background? Or is it going to be able to handle it under my evaluative or my whole light meter? And 99% of the time, it's going to be able to handle it under your evaluative or your whole light meter. Okay. So when you get that scale balanced in the middle, remember that it also depends on what you have told the camera to do. And this is behind the scenes. You can't see it. So this is where you have to know what you're asking the camera to do. Does that make sense?
Yep.
It reminds me a little bit of my car has different kinds of driving modes. And I don't know what they mean. I just drive it. But I am sure if my son got in my car that he would test out all the different driving modes and he would set it for his driving mode. But I just drive it. And I don't know what the different driving modes would do. Now, that's the same thing your light meter is doing. It's doing something behind the scenes that you don't know about. And so now you have some information about what your light meter is doing behind the scenes. So we're going to keep it on your evaluative or your whole light meter from now on. Okay. Now, when you get that scale in the middle, you have to get the scale in the middle by using your f-stop and your shutter speed. So let me teach you now about your f-stop. If you look at this picture of the malachite butterfly, do you see how the malachite butterfly is in focus? And the little pink flower, the bleeding heart, is in focus? But you see how the background is out of focus? See that? The human eye looks at everything that's in focus, and the human eye ignores what's out of focus. So when you present a photograph to someone, their eye is immediately going to scan everything that's in focus, and everything that's out of focus, they will ignore. So when we are controlling how people look at our photographs, we are putting certain areas of the photograph in focus and certain areas of the photograph out of focus. And the way we do that is through this thing called an f-stop. So what's in the background?
Leaves.
Leaves? That brown stuff, leaves?
The wall.
Wall?
Can't tell.
Can't tell. And it's
Okay.
not important. It's gravel in a parking lot.
Oh,
Now, if I had let you see that and you had recently been shopping for gravel, then you would immediately go, oh, that's the gravel I was looking for. Why didn't anybody have that this weekend? So you're now off distracted because you're not paying attention to what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show you this butterfly. So the more things we let people see, the more things they can get distracted by. So the way that we eliminate those backgrounds is through this thing called an f-stop. So what I'd like you to do is take that piece of paper on your desk, flip it over so that you can draw for just a little bit. And I want you to draw this, it looks like a graph, but a straight line here, and give yourself plenty of room to write underneath here and plenty of room to write over on the left-hand side as well. And down here on this bottom line, draw a straight line across the bottom, and then you're going to draw a vertical line that goes up. But along this straight line on the bottom, I want you to put the numbers 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32. Now these numbers, oh, and we'll go ahead and do up against the horizontal line as well. 500, 250, 125, 60, 30, 15, 8, 4, 0.3 with quotation marks, 2 with quotation marks, and then the word bulb. Now down here on the bottom, 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, 5.6, 6.8, 8, 11, 16, 22, and 32. These are called f stops. F with a slash and then the word stop. And f stops are the numbers that you and I talk about. Kathy, what f stop should we use? Well, why don't you try 5.6? What f stop did you use on that picture, Monica? I used an F16. Well, why'd you use an F16 versus an F32? We talk about f stops. These are the numbers we talk about. We can see them on the back of our camera. When you download your pictures to your computer, you can see what f stop you used. Maybe on your lens, you can see f stops. So these are numbers that you and I talk about. It is a mathematical formula. F, function symbol in math, slash, division, and then the word stop. So it is a mathematical formula, but you never, ever, ever have to know the mathematical formula. Okay, so you just don't ever have to know about it. So yeah, Tracy. No, you're good? Okay. So f stops are the numbers that you and I talk about, and f stops are the numbers that we see on the back of our camera. But what happens inside the camera that you don't see, this is all invisible to you, is there is a thing called an aperture in your lens, not in the camera, in the lens. And that aperture at 2.8 is a really big opening. And it's letting light come through that opening. And then once the shutter opens, that light's going to hit the sensor. And at 2.8, your aperture opening is really, really big. And at 3.5, your aperture open gets a little smaller. And at 4.5, it gets a little smaller. And at 5.6, it gets a little smaller. And at 6.8, it gets smaller. And 8, it gets smaller. And 11, it gets smaller, and 16, it gets smaller, and 22, it gets smaller. And by the time you get to 32, the aperture opening is just a pinprick of light. So as you move through these f stops, there's really something happening in your lens, and that lens is closing down the aperture smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller as you move through the scale. And then the beautiful thing happens with this called depth of field, D-E-P-T-H of field, D-E-P-T-H of field. And the depth of field at 2.8, when the aperture opening is real, real big, the area in focus, it's called depth of field, but it's really the area in focus, is only about 1/16 of an inch. So under that 2.8, draw yourself a line that's about 1/16 of an inch long. And then when we get to 3.5, we get to maybe 2/16 of an inch. So a little bit longer line. This is how much area is in focus. And when we get to 4.5, we get a little bit more area in focus. And when we get to 5.6, we get a little bit more area in focus. And when we get to 6.8, we get more area. And then under 8, make yourself a big, thick line. Because there's an old saying in photography, F8 and be there. Meaning just put that camera, that lens on F8 and shoot, and most stuff will be in focus. So that's where the program mode puts you, by the way, the P mode, which I never ever want you to use, but I'll explain that to you in next class. The P mode just puts you at F8. Most stuff's at focus. Don't worry about it. Picture will look fine. Your cell phone, F8. Most stuff's in focus. So that F8 is where most stuff's in focus. And then as you get to F11, more stuff comes into focus. 16, more stuff is in focus. 22, more stuff is in focus. And F32, infinity is in focus. So once you get all the way to F32, then everything's in focus. So from the first thing that you see in the bottom of your lens, all the way to the mountains in the background is in focus. So F32 means everything's in focus. Now, if you look at those numbers, you see that they're a bit confusing. 2.8 is a little number, big hole, shallow depth of field. See that? See how they're kind of not all in harmony with each other? So the way you can remember this is that at 2.8, only 2 things are in focus, but at 32, 32 things are in focus. The bigger the number, the more stuff is in focus. The smaller the number, the less stuff is in focus. Okay? So the bigger your number is, the more stuff is in focus. The smaller your number is, the less stuff is in focus. So we don't see this aperture opening and closing in your lens. So you just have to know what's happening. Once again, something happening underneath the hood of this. But the depth of field is all because of physics. It's the 9 lenses, convex and concave pieces of glass inside your lens, where they're spaced together, and then light coming through it, and then either getting squeezed down or not getting squeezed down. Physics. So it's universal, always happened. Yeah, Tracy.
Can I ask, is there a unit of measurement that goes with these numbers, or it's just an arbitrary number?
For right now, it's theory,
Okay.
because unless you did the mathematical formula,
Mhm.
that's when you could actually say, okay, this and this, because it all depends on what lens you're using. It all depends on how close you are to your subject, how far away you are from the subject, and then what f-stop you're using. So there's a lot of variables that go into it. So for right now, it's just theory for you.
Thank you.
And I'll tell you, 5.6 is my favorite f-stop because most stuff in the background is going to be out of focus. And also, the further your background is from the subject, the more you're going to be able to throw the background out of focus. So the closer your background is to your subject, the harder it is to blow it out of focus. The further it is from your subject, the more easier it is to blow it out of focus. So that's why as photographers, we're jostling around trying to get distance between our subject and the background, because then we can make the background soft. And you'll play with this in your homework assignment. So if you look at this picture of the statue in Italy, you see that her fingers are out of focus, and you see that the wall behind her is out of focus. So probably what f-stop do you think I'm using?
Well, I'm just going to say 5.6 because you said that's your favorite.
Yeah, and it is a 5.6. Yes, exactly. But you see how the hand's out of focus, the vegetation in the front is out of focus, and then definitely the wall's out of focus. And that's just to draw your eye to the statue's face. Now, if a butterfly landed on the statue's finger, and now I wanted to try to get the butterfly and the statue's face in focus, by focusing on the butterfly, now I would probably have to go to an 8 or a 16, and then my wall's going to come in focus. So it's a playing that you have to do sometimes. It's a fiddling around, and this is where you have to know your lenses and your equipment. So looking at this picture, this is a little 2-year-old. And you see that her ears, where her little earrings are out of focus. So really, it's just that tiny plane of her face that's in focus. So what f-stop do you think I'm using?
4.5.
4.5, yeah. What do you think?
Or 3.5.
Or 3.5, yeah. Yeah, so I'm probably here going down into the 3.5 range. And also, you notice that I've got the background as far away from her as I can possibly get it. So while she's looking at the people around me and interacting with the other adults, I've gotten down on ground level with her, which makes the picture look a lot better because I'm right on eye level with her. And then I've moved to make sure that the background is as far away as possible. So the background 8, 10, 15 feet away is just going to make it much, much softer. And then what's in the background? What do you think?
Flower pots.
Pots, exactly. So you can tell that they are, but you haven't gone back there to study them. But if I let you see them, you'd be back there digging around in those pots, especially if you've been shopping for pots recently or rearranging pots, as we all have been doing because it's springtime. So your background is soft through the f-stop. You see here, little girl on a swing. You all know that she's on a swing. You know exactly what kind of garden swing this is. We've all seen it. It's not important to the photograph. It's not important 20 years later to the picture of her. What's important is her little face, and then blowing that background out so that there's nothing competing with her little face. So 5.6 here. So we're trying to just narrow it down to putting in focus what's important in the photograph. So you see here, this is an f4, and then this is an f22. And this is a 4, and this is a 22. So it's, what are you trying to convey? What are you trying to communicate? What are you trying to tell your viewer? So are you going to do it with an f4, or are you going to do it with an f22? The Ronda bullfighting ring in Spain and the crystal ball. And remember, I teach a crystal ball class in June if you want to take it. You notice that the edges of the crystal ball are soft and everything in the background is soft, but you can kind of get an idea of what I'm communicating. Or do you want to show everybody the whole thing? So do you just want to communicate this, or do you want to communicate this? So the f-stop you use is where you decide how much of the scene you're going to let the viewer see and how much of the scene you're going to let the viewer not see. This is your creativity. This is what you're communicating to the viewer. Okay. Now, put your camera in your hands. So Bonnie, on your camera, you have a 2-dial camera. You have a big dial in the front and a big dial on the back. And you want to make sure that your big dial in the back is unlocked. So you've got a big dial in the back and you've got a little dial in the front. So I want you all to rotate your f-stop dial and tell me, where do your f-stops go from what to what? 5.6 to 22. Bonnie, you're going to do that with your big dial in your back, in the back. Alicia, remember you do that with your plus minus button and rotating the dial. Monica, you've got to do it with the punching it in the back and rotating the dial, right? And then Tracy, how do you change your f-stop on yours?
That's a good question. I'm
You've
trying
got your,
to find it again.
you've got your back dial, you know, that thumb dial, and I think you push it in and it moves over to your f-stop.
Okay, let me try that. I'll show you what I'm getting.
Does that work? Ooh, I can't see too
Yeah.
close. Yeah.
But I'll find it. I've moved it around before. I just have to figure out how again.
Okay. I think it's pushing that wheel in with your thumb. Does that wheel go in?
Yeah, there it is. I got it.
Okay, good, good, good. Okay, so what's the smallest f-stop you can get on your camera right now? And just holler it out.
4.5.
4.5, good.
2.8 for me.
2.8, good.
3.5.
3.5, good. Monica?
There we go. Okay, hold on. I'm punching my buttons. Mine's going to be 4.
Yours is 4. Good, 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 good. That's the smallest number you can get. Now, zoom your lens, and can you get a new smaller number when you zoom your lens?
5.6.
5.6. And the first number you got was a 3.5, Bonnie?
No, 4.5.
4.5, 4.5 to 5.6. Good.
I'm still 2.8.
You're still 2.8. Good. Alicia?
Oh, sorry. It is 5.6.
5.6, and it was 3.5,
Yes, ma'am.
correct? And then Monica,
I went to 5.6.
5.6, and you were at
I was at 4 a while ago.
4 a while ago. Okay. That's because all of you all have the Canons, not Tracy, but you all have what's called a variable f-stop lens. So when you're zoomed back, you can get one number like your 4, but if you zoom out, you can only go to maybe a 5.6. And
Yeah.
that makes your lens lighter and less expensive. So if you had a lens that stayed at that 3.8 or that 4 throughout its zoom range, then it would be more expensive and it would be heavier. So you get a little bit of a weight savings there. Now, take it to the bigger number. What's your biggest number you can get on your f-stop dial?
36.
36, good.
Just 8 for me.
Just 8, Tracy, okay.
Mine now goes to 40.
Yours goes 40, good. Monica?
25.
25. Now zoom, and what's the new biggest number you can get?
I'm sorry, mine went from 22 to 36. I'm sorry.
22 to 36.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Monica, Bonnie,
Oh, mine went from 32 to 40.
32 to 40. Good, 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 good. Monica,
32.
32. Good. And then Tracy, yours stays the same no matter where you zoom in and out, right?
Yeah.
Just
I think
8.
so. 8.
Okay. Okay. So once again, when you're at the high end on you variable f-stop lens people, you see that you can get one big number when you're zoomed back and another big number when you zoom out. So once again, that's just the construction of the lens. If you put another lens on, don't do it. If you put another lens on your camera, then you'll see it has another range. And Tracy, I've now learned on your camera that you're 2.8 to 8. If you look at my scale that I gave you, your 2.8 is really probably R4.
Okay.
And your 8 is R22.
Okay.
So that's when they were giving some of these other cameras some different numbering systems.
That's not nice.
Well, it just is confusing.
Makes it too confusing.
It's just confusing. Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, but good to know.
Yeah. Anybody or in your camera bag, I've told you all that at 2.8 would mean like a 1/16 of an inch. So just in case you happen to have a 2.8 lens in your camera bag, this picture that I took of my cat's socks is with a 50 millimeter 2.8 lens. And this is a darling lens of the Instagram group because it looks really beautiful with that pure blown out background back there. But at 2.8, in fact, this lens goes to 1.4, so it's even narrower than 2.8. To get a picture where Socks's nose and eye were in focus, and his nose, if you've got a cat, you know, we're dealing with a little bitty small depth of field there. One picture where I got his nose and his eye in the same plane of focus, it took me 50 pictures to get one. Because the depth of field is so small that to handhold that camera with him moving his head around and try to get the focus point exactly where I need it to be with that shallow of a depth of field, it's really difficult. So if you happen to have a lens that has a 2.8 or a 1.4 on it, we don't necessarily shoot it at 1.4 or 2.8. We shoot it at f4, just like we would a regular lens, or we shoot it at 5.6. What that lens is constructed to do is give you that pure, blown out, soft background. So that's what the construction of the lens does, is gives us that beautiful blown out background. So it's not a lens that we would really shoot at 2.8 or 1.4. It's the construction of the lens. So every lens that you buy is designed for a specific purpose. Lenses are like tools. They're like wrenches and hammers. They are designed for a specific purpose. There is some reason why the engineers designed that lens. And so every lens has a specific job that it does. So if you ever think about buying a new lens, you might want to rent it first rather than buy it, or borrow a friend's lens rather than buy it, to make sure it really is the lens that you need versus want. So make sure that, each lens that you're buying is there for a specific purpose. I own 5 lenses out of my whole camera bag. I have 5 lenses. So each one of them is there for a specific purpose. Okay. Okay. So that's your lenses and that's f-stops. So when you look at this scene, what f-stop do you think I'm using?
F22.
Yay. Why do you say 22, Bonnie?
Well, because the motion is blurred, so
Mhm.
you have to have had some more light is covering the movement.
Yeah, but what's depth of field do?
Depth of field widens.
Yeah. So how do you know I'm using a 22 here?
I probably guessed. I just thought that looks like it has a lot of light in it to me. Like she opened up the lens.
You guessed right. So why can you tell that I'm an f22 here?
Because the background's not blurred out. The
Correct.
The
Correct.
bushes
correct.
are not blurred out.
So I can see all the way down the river. Everybody see that? So when I saw this river in Costa Rica, the first thing that I knew that I wanted to do is I want to go down there and I want to do a massive depth of field on this one. So I'm going to put my camera on the tripod, go down to the bank of the river, and I'm going to put my lens on f22. Now, looking at it, you see that there's not anything really, really dark or really, really light. There's a whole lot of white stuff in there, but you've never really seen water looking like that in real life, correct? So this is the first optical illusion that I'm going to show you, that because we photographers like to play around with a lot of optical illusions. But you see that everything's got roughly the same tone to it. And so that means we can use our evaluative light meter or our whole light meter, Tracy, and yours.
whole.
Okay. So you see that we didn't need to make a choice on what light meter we used. And now we know that we're going to use an f22 or an f32. Okay. So let's go back to the chart for just a moment. So once I have determined what f-stop I want to use in my photograph, then I have to rotate my shutter speed dial until my scale goes right in the middle. And when my scale goes right in the middle, I have to determine if that shutter speed is going to give me what I'm looking for. And I have to determine if my f-stop is going to give me what I'm looking for. So we're in the manual mode. The camera's not choosing these for you. You are choosing them based on when you're balancing the light meter. So let me tell you about shutter speeds now. Put your camera in your hand again. Now I want you to rotate your front dial for you Canon users, and Tracy, rotate the dial without pushing it in. So you want to set it over on the other number. So when you rotate your front dial, that's your shutter speed dial. What is the fastest shutter speed you can get to? What's the biggest number you can get to?
40,000, 1 over 40,000.
40,000, yeah.
Sorry, 4,000.
4,000.
4,000, yeah.
1 over
1 over
4,000, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alicia, 4,000?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
the same.
same thing. Tracy. Unmute. Unmute, Tracy.
It's, I actually went down to the f-stop, so I'm trying to, it looks like it goes to from 60 to 1,000.
To 1,000, right? Only
Yeah.
1,000?
1,000, well, hang on. Let me see if I can I'm trying to get my cursor up there. The touch screen with fat fingers doesn't work.
Yeah. Should just be that back dial without, I
But
think,
it has 2
Yeah.
things on it, and so it went to the top thing.
okay.
Okay, it goes to 4,000, 8,000, 16,000.
Okay, 4,000,
Done.
8,000, 16,000. So yours goes to 16,000 and then
Yes.
everybody else's goes to 4,000, and that's real now. So you're 16,000 now. And you see why because you have that lens that's a 12,000 millimeter thing. You see why you need that high shutter speed.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, now rotate the dial, your shutter speed dial, in the opposite direction. And what's the first time you get quotation marks? See the quotation marks on your grid that we drew? When's the first time you get quotation marks?
3.
Which one, Bonnie?
3.
3,
3?
0.3.
0.3
0 in marks and then 3.
and 3, exactly. Tracy, when's the first time you get to quotation marks?
1.
1 with quotation marks. Okay, that is 1 second for Tracy's camera. And for the Canon cameras, that's 0.3 with quotation marks. So that's a third of a second. We've gone into decimals is what we've gone into. And you Canon users, if you'll notice, if you rotate the opposite direction, you'll get to a plane 3. And that's a third of a second because it's a fraction really, because all these numbers are fractions. But then to get, we can't have 0. So we have to go someplace after we get, from fractions. And so Canon throws us into some decimals for a little bit. And then finally you get a 2 with quotation marks, and then you get a 3 with quotation marks and a 4 with quotation marks. So anytime you see those quotation marks with a whole number, then that means we're into full seconds. So 4,000, 8,000, 16,000, those are very, very fast. But then we also get into these full seconds. And this is where we start doing some really creative photography. So we get some good stuff happening at full seconds. So I'll show you those. And then continue rotating the dial. And what's the last number on your shutter speed dial?
The smallest.
30
Yeah,
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Good, Bonnie.
Mine was 30.
You're 30 seconds, 30 with
Thank-
quotation marks, right?
Yeah.
So just 4 for mine.
And yours 4 for yours, Tracy. So you can't get 30 seconds, but I suspect you've got a menu setting somewhere to get you into 30 seconds. So that's just something you can go dig for later on. So you see how many shutter speeds you have? Everywhere from 30 seconds all the way to 4,000th of a second. We have a ton of shutter speeds. And so on your handout, I've given you 5 that we can use as benchmarks. And if you can just kind of put these 5 shutter speeds in your head, you'll get an idea of where you use what shutter speed. Okay. So on your handout, the first shutter speed that you see is 1/8 of a second. And Bonnie noticed that the photo that I showed you earlier of the running water, that the water's all blurry. So water always blurs at 1/8 of a second or slower. And my picture that I'm looking for is blurry water. So when I go and I
That's
put my
exactly
camera
waterfall.
and my tripod up and I set it up next to the river, then I set my f-stop on 22 or 32 because I know I want to get all the depth of field. And Bonnie, we're going to use 22 because you guessed 22 before. So we're going to use 22. And oh, I'm sorry, we're going to use 32 because my lens has 32 on it. And now when I look through my viewfinder and I rotate my shutter speed dial, because I've set my f-stop, and now I'm going to see what the camera sets for my shutter speed. When I finally get the scale right in the middle, I get 1/8 of a second at 32, f32. Now, brain needs to kick in because I'm the one with the brain. The camera doesn't have a brain. So f32, I'm going to see all the depth of field in the photograph. 1/8 of a second, Kathy's handout says 1/8 of a second is where water blurs. And that's where the scale goes right in the middle. And so I'm going to say, bingo, I got it. Okay. But Bonnie's standing next to me and her lens has got an f22 on it. And assuming we're looking at exactly the same subject, we've got everything lined up exactly right. Bonnie's lens is going to balance at f22 because her lens won't go to 32. Her light meter is going to balance at 22 at 1/15 of a second. So her water is not going to blur. So Bonnie says, wait a second, I want my water to blur. So what we have to do is maybe wait for the sun to go down for another 15 minutes, so it gets a little darker. And then Bonnie's F22 will balance at 1/8 of a second, and my F32 will now balance at 1/4 of a second.
Hmm.
And that's because these are the same light readings, but they're just equal to each other. And if we were taking a picture with no blurry water, like if that stream is a very famous trout stream in Costa Rica, and trout fishermen don't care whether the water's blurred, only photographers care whether the water's blurred. And so if I want to take a picture that's going to interest researchers or trout fishermen or something like that, then if I went to F16, the light meter would balance at 1/30th of a second. And if I went to 11, the light meter would balance at 60th of a second. And if I went to 8, the light meter would balance at 1/25th of a second. So now I'm using a faster shutter speed, which is stopping the water, which is now making the water not blurred. Or I could balance the light meter at 6.8 at 250 or 5.6 at 500. And that's because each one of these equals the same amount of light. The hole in the aperture gets bigger, the shutter speed gets faster. The hole in the aperture gets smaller, the shutter speed has to go longer. So there are several places where you can balance your light meter. Which numbers you choose are up to your brain. And this is where you've got to be educated in knowing which numbers do I choose, which numbers are going to give me the photograph that I'm looking for. So if we used a fast shutter speed, then this is what the picture would look like. And if we used a slow shutter speed, this is what the picture would look like. But you notice the light is exactly the same in both pictures. You see that? The light is exactly the same in both pictures. And that's because I've balanced my light meter in both pictures. So the light is exactly the same in both photographs. So when you go to balance your light meter, you can balance your light meter in all different kinds of ways. But whether or not it's going to freeze the subject or blur the subject is all based on what shutter speed you choose. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
You're sort of holding on. Yeah, sort of holding on. So shutter speed stops movement or blurs movement. F-stop controls how much we see depth-wise in the scene or how much we don't see. So if you look at this photograph of the canal in Venice, the water is blurred. So roughly what shutter speed am I using? When is the point where water starts blurring?
8.
8, you got it. That's on your handout. So anytime you see a photo and it's got blurred water in it, then the photographer is roughly using 1/8 of a second or slower, universal, no matter what lens they're using. And you notice that the people are blurred in this picture as well. So, you know, this lady's a little bit more solid, but then this guy's almost completely blurred. This person right here, you know, somewhat blurred. We call this ghost photography, by the way, because sometimes you can just completely make people disappear in a photograph. You don't see them at all. The guy with the white bag right there, he's lingering. He's probably going to buy whatever's in that window. So he's lingering. So he's more solid, but then the people on the bridge aren't as solid. So if I take the picture again with a faster shutter speed, I can see the gondolas.
Hmm.
But if my shutter speed's not fast enough, the gondolas disappear. See the guy with the white bag? So if you want to see the gondolas, I've got to have a fast enough shutter speed to stop the gondolas. So you've got to look at any movement in your photograph and think, how fast of a shutter speed do I need to have to blur that movement or solidify that movement? So in this case, 1/25th or 2/50th of a second, because if I have too slow of a shutter speed, the gondolas just float on by because they're there. You just don't see them because they weren't in one place long enough to register. Make sense?
Does.
Good, good. So where you balance your light meter, what numbers you choose determines what your final photograph looks like. If the scale's right in the middle, then your light's going to look right. But whether your subject is stopped or blurred, or whether you've got a lot of depth of field or not a lot of depth of field, all depends on what numbers you choose and how much light you've got. So let's balance your light meter for right now. Everybody put 5.6 back on your f-stop. .6?
Mhm.
Okay, good. Okay, now I want you to point your camera at a light object in your room, maybe a lamp or something like that. And Monica and Tracy, go ahead and unmute me. Unmute if you can, so we can do this kind of quick without you having to mute and unmute. Okay. Somebody's got somebody going on. So point your.
I have finches.
That's okay. That's okay. Point your camera at something lit in the room, a lamp or something like that. You've got an f-stop of 5.6. I've given that to you. Now rotate your shutter speed dial until your scale goes right in the middle, and then take the picture and tell me what shutter speed you got. So point your camera at some sort of light in the room. And then rotate your shutter speed dial until your scale goes right in the middle, and then tell me what shutter speed you got.
1/15.
15th. Good, good, good.
I said 15
15th.
or 1/15th. 1/15th. Right.
Okay, good.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
It looks like that. Yeah. So what'd you get, Tracy? What'd you get, Bonnie?
It's 1/6.
1/6. Good. And take the picture. And then when you look at it on the back of the camera, it should look like it does in the room. It's not a great picture,
No,
but it's the first time you balance your light meter.
Won't take-
What'd you get,
I don't-
Bonnie?
I don't think mine worked.
Yes, it will. Yes, it will.
Well, it didn't work. I mean, it's like flashing at me.
Yeah,
Um,
mine's not taking either. Why won't it take?
The picture is flashing at you, Bonnie?
Yeah.
So
The light-
that means you didn't put the scale right in the middle,
Oh,
or is only part of the picture flashing at you?
no, just the light itself.
Okay, that's good. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Good.
Oh,
Good, good, good,
okay.
good. And what shutter speed did you get?
I'm get, so I don't think I've done this right. I have 1/15th, but when I looked through here, it
Uh-huh.
was not in the scale was not in the middle.
Okay, you got to put the scale right in the middle. Now point your
And how do I
camera
do
to
that?
something else in the room and do the same thing. Rotate the dial until the scale, the shutter speed dial, your f-stop stays at 5.6. I want you to be there. So all you're doing is rotating your shutter speed dial until the scale goes right in the middle. And when you get it right in the middle, take the picture and tell me what shutter speed you got.
.5. The
Okay,
1/5.
Good, good. Whatever that number was, yeah. Half of a second. What'd you get? 6th, good. And you notice these are slow numbers. That's because you're inside. It's dark for a camera. So what'd you get? What'd you get, Bonnie?
So where am I reading that?
You're reading it right next to where your light meter is through the viewfinder. So that's why I don't want you to take your camera, don't take your face down right after you take the picture. I mean, tell me what your shutter speed is while
I
you're
see.
looking at it. And you see where right next to your light meter, you've got your 5.6 and whatever your shutter speed is.
So I've got I'm reading a 1/16 and a 15, looks like.
16 and a 15, you should
Yeah.
see a 5.6.
I'm not seeing a 5.6.
And remember with your camera, Bonnie,
Oh.
it's the big dial in the back that sets you to
Yeah,
5.6.
I must have changed the f-stop somehow.
Yeah,
Okay, now I've got, okay, 5.6.
good. And now rotate, just rotate your finger dial. And that's your shutter dial.
My finger dial. Oh,
Yes, right up there. Try, Alicia, point your camera down at something dark like the floor and try it. Monica, what'd you get?
I got 1/6, but I noticed some things that I
Yes.
pointed it at.
Uh-huh,
It never came like the little dial
yeah.
never let me go to any, like it never came up on my little chart.
And when it won't come up on the scale is because
Mm.
you're rotating the wrong way. And
Okay.
it's just backed up, it's just jammed up against the side. So you need to rotate the other direction.
Okay, let me try again.
Yeah.
okay, when I'm
Wow.
using this little button rotating,
Uh-huh.
it's changing my f-stop.
Oh, there it goes.
Are you in the M mode on the top of the camera?
Yeah.
You're on the M mode
Mhm.
on the top of the camera? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So you might have, when you rotate your back dial, does it change your shutter speed?
But this dial here,
The big back
this one
dial?
here,
Let
I
me
have
see.
tried that. Let me try that. Yeah,
Okay, so that means you've programmed that camera to make your front dial your f-stop and your back dial your shutter speed.
okay.
And if you don't like that,
I don't like that.
I find that kind of cumbersome. If you don't like that, it's in your custom menu, but don't change it now.
No,
Okay.
okay.
It's in your custom menu. And if you need to, I can show you how to do it during the week. Okay.
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay. So
Yeah,
anyway,
I took a lesson with somebody a long time ago and they made a lot of changes on the camera.
yeah.
This is what you should do, this is what you should do. And I didn't really understand a lot of it, so I was just like, okay.
And that might have been logical for them, but I don't think in the long run, it's going to be logical.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
that's perfect.
Okay. So point your camera down at the floor
Mhm.
in a dark area and then do the same thing. So put the light meter scale in the middle, and then what shutter speed did you get when you point the camera down at a dark area on the floor?
I got 6 and then I got 8. I did 2.
6 and 8. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you see how now it's a long shutter speed. 6 seconds is a long time. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3.
Yeah, and it's very blurry.
It's very blurry. Exactly. It's not real clear. No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. Same thing, Monica.
Yeah, I actually got into my decimals.
Oh, good. Okay. Very good.
It's
Very-
just really blurry.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so everybody now see how to balance your light meter?
Mhm.
Bonnie, that makes sense?
It does make sense, yes.
Okay, good. Tracy,
Yes.
makes sense? Good. Okay, congratulations. Hour and 20 minutes into class and you have now balanced your light meter. So when I say balance your light meter, what I mean is you put the light meter scale right in the middle. And what number you use, f-stop shutter speed, depends on what you want your picture to look like. And so that's where you've got to play around with it a little bit. So going back to your handout, let me continue on with those 5 shutter speeds that I'm having you all use today to as benchmarks. So in this picture of the Redbud, I've got the camera on the tripod. I'm all ready for nice blurred out backgrounds behind the Redbud. And when I look through the viewfinder, the branch is just ever so gently waving up and down, ever so gently. So now instead of concentrating on making the background nice and soft, the first number I dial in now has to be my shutter speed because I have to stop the movement of the branch. And since it's gently moving, that's 1/15 of a second. So 1/15 of a second will stop gentle movement. So anytime you look through the viewfinder and you see something just gently moving, then 1/15 of a second will stop that. 1/60 of a second is what we need for anything that's living. So Monica, your little finches and stuff like that, anything that's just living, looking right at us. But in this case, like with socks, he's just looking at me. He's not running around. He's not jumping. He's just looking at me. So cat, dog, grandmother, lizard, snake, frog, horse, whatever. Any living creature that's just looking at us, maybe moving their head back and forth, blinking their eyes, that's a 60th of a second. So we've got to have at least a 60th of a second to stop basic movements of a living creature. So with this case with socks, if to take the picture, I make sure that I've got my shutter speed at least at 60. It can go faster than that. And then I balance my light meter and see what f-stop it gives me. If I have some wiggle room and I can move around, then I will. And you'll see that when you start working on your homework assignment. Now, notice on the picture of socks that his eyes are in focus. If the eyes are not in focus, it drives us crazy as humans. We always have to have the eyes in focus. So we want to make sure that we put a focus point on the creature's eyes. So let me show you how to move your focus points around. Okay, so Canon users, you all put your camera in your hand if you would. And Canon users, topmost right hand button, it's a rectangle with 9 little buttons in the middle, or 9 little dots in the middle of it. And Monica, I think yours is up in the front of the camera now, isn't it? Yeah. But Alicia, yours is right back here. Bonnie, yours is right back here as well. And then Pam, who's not here tonight, yours is right back here as well. So this little button, when you push it, now allows you to move your focus point around. This is how you activate the focus points and move them around. Bonnie and Pam, on your camera, on the 6D and the 7D Mark II, you all also have all of these options that you can choose, correct, Bonnie? On the 6D?
Auto selection.
When you push this button right up here on the top?
When I push that, nothing's happening.
Or when you push that button and then look on the back display panel?
Nothing's happening on the display panel.
Ah, push and hold it? No? Okay, then somebody's deactivated it because this is really, really important.
Okay.
Very important. And by the way, there is in your orange menus, there is a place where you can reset to factory defaults and it'll reset everything like it came from the factory.
Is that something you would think I should do then?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
because you may not know everything that's been set.
Right.
Yeah. And then you and Pam on your cameras, you all can now choose a wide zone or one individual as we're moving through it. And then on you rebels, Monica and Alicia, when you all push that button, you all now have about 9 of them, right, Monica?
See, when I push that button, mine comes up and I have more than 9, but it allows me to select either 1 point or 9 points. So I can have a selection.
So yeah, and this is where Alicia and Monica, you all can select one, and then that's where I would put it on the eye of the cat, for instance.
Okay.
So you all can choose one, or you can choose all of them. Rarely with your cameras would I choose all of them with the rebels, because if you choose all of them, you're just letting the camera choose whatever one it wants, because there's only one focus point. So you're just letting the camera choose whatever it wants to. So it doesn't have any smart technology in the back of it. Now, Tracy, did you find where you can move yours around?
That look right?
Yes, exactly. So yours the same thing. You want one individual focus point and you want to put it where you want it to be. And you should be able, if I'm not mistaken, to use that toggle in the back to move it around.
Yeah, or you can touch screen it.
Or you can touch screen it. Good, 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 good. So the key is you choose where the focus point is. Don't let the camera choose. Because if you let the camera choose, then it just chooses anything. What'd you find, Monica?
Oh, I took a picture. So I set one focus point and my little boy's car seat carrier is probably about 3 feet away from me. So I just focused on it and took a picture. and it took me into the decimals, but the light was really nice. It
Uh-huh.
was bright. It was
Yeah.
all even lighting.
Yeah.
It looked really good.
It is. It works. I promise you it works. Okay. So in this instance with the lioness in Africa, I'm in the Land Cruiser. I'm looking down on the top of her head because she's deep in the grass. And the guide I'm with tells me the moment she hears the male lion make noise, she's going to raise her head up. She's going to look around and she's out of here. So you better get ready. So I position a focus point up toward the top of the frame, because I realize that when she raises her head up, if I'm right in the middle, I'm going to cut most of her head off because I'm so close to her. And so I use a focus point up at the top, and that way when she raises her head up, I realign the camera, use that focus point right on her eye, and now I get my shot. So moving that focus point around is going to make your pictures look a lot more interesting. So focus point up on the top in this case, so that I get it on the man's face and not on his hand. And by the way, there was a young lady that took some wedding pictures for somebody in the family a couple of years ago. And of course, I looked over her shoulder and she didn't know what in the heck she was doing with her camera at all. And her focus point was right in the middle for every picture. So it's just boring once you start noticing that, because, you know, bride's face right in the middle, but then a whole top of the picture is not being used for anything. Feet are cut off. So it just becomes really boring when the focus point is always in the middle. So you need to move them around. So anyway, going back to this, 2/50th of a second for the man on a horse in a parade. So man walking by, parade on a horse, focus point up on the top, and I've got to have a shutter speed of at least 250th of a second to stop him. Little kid on a swing, not a big kid, little kid on a swing. And then as I'm pushing him and, you know, back and forth, 250th of a second. And you notice that there's a long way between him and the background. So this is where I've positioned my subjects so that they are a long way away from their background, so that I can use my 5.6 and get a more interesting photograph. 250th of a second for the blue-gray tanager. Tracy, you've probably seen these in Costa Rica,
Beautiful.
haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's so
But
pretty.
250th of a second, because it's a rather slow moving bird. And you notice that the focus point's over on the side, and then the bird is positioned over to the side. So this just makes the photograph look a lot more interesting without having everything right smack dab in the middle of the frame. So those focus points off to the side allow you to do different types of compositions with it. So 250th of a second to stop this type of movement in a bird, not real fast, but, you know, just a nice gentle movement. And then 500th of a second is what we need for something like the whale's tail. Now, with this whale's tail, I really need more than 500th of a second. But because of the light that I had, you all found that when you look down at, you know, at the darkness underneath your desk, your shutter speed's slow. Well, this day that I photographed this whale, we didn't have a whole lot of light. And so with this whale, when it's fluking, I know that water forms balls at 500th of a second. So a splash is individual balls at 500th of a second. So what I'm doing is, because the fastest shutter speed I can get with the light conditions we have is 500th of a second, I'm going for when the whale is not moving its tail real fast up, but when the whale is already at the top of the movement and now starts sliding down in the big spray of water. So that's when my 500th of a second will work. But we have another thing that we can do now. So if we find ourselves in a situation where we don't have enough light to get faster, because honestly, when I did the whales a month ago in Alaska, we were at 4,000 to 8,000 to get those. So we can now use ISO to let us go faster. So in the event that you ever can't get a fast enough shutter speed for the light that you've got, then you can push your ISO button and raise your ISO, and that will let you get a faster and faster and faster shutter speed. So if we ever have a situation where we don't have enough light to get the shutter speed we want, we can punch our ISO button and raise our ISO. So ISO is how fast your sensor is recording light. And as you raise your ISO, your sensor records light faster and faster and faster. Now, this might sound like a get out of jail free card, but it's not. So you got to use this judiciously. So here's some men playing the drums after dinner one night when we're in the Sahara Desert, and we're out there to photograph Milky Way and stars and all kinds of other stuff. And we're sleeping in these tents, and the men have cooked dinner for us. And now they're playing their drums until it gets dark enough to photograph our stars. And I'm not going to not photograph this.
Yeah.
So put the tripod up, you know, I don't have enough shutter speed to stop the men's hands. So I just keep raising the ISO until I get a relatively fast shutter speed. But you notice that the hands still blurred out. You see that? So this is an ISO 3200. So you all now, right now, according to your homework, Canon should be at ISO 100. Tracy, you should be at ISO 100 also, right?
Yes.
So ISO 100 is your best quality photograph. That is where you get the absolute best color, you get the best clarity, and then if you're sharp enough, you get the best sharpness. This is your best picture. As you start moving from 100 to 200 to 400 to 800 to 1600 to 3200, you degrade the quality of your photograph. So the higher you move your ISO, the worse your photograph is going to look. So this is an ISO 3200. And if you look at the rugs on the sand, it's not bad. If you look at the fire pit, it's not bad. But if we blow it up, that's what it looks like. So this is called noise. And we have noise reduction software and all kinds of other stuff right now. So we could move this picture through noise reduction software, and that's what it looks like. So this was before, and this is after. So you can see we can get rid of it, but we can never get the guy's hands back. So if I want to take a picture, and if I don't have enough shutter speed to stop the subject, then I will punch the ISO button and raise the ISO. And the higher we raise the ISO, the higher our shutter speed can go. So this, for instance, the Jaguar down in Brazil, this is probably an ISO in the 20,000 range. So the other one was 3,200. This is probably 20,000 range, but this is taken with Canon's top of the line camera. But the boat I'm in has 12 other photographers in it, my group on the photo tour. We have a boatman in the back, we have a motor in the back, and we are puttering along on the river and jostling around trying to get our shot. And the Jaguar is walking through the shade on the ground, on the land, because we can't get on the land. And so I got to have a 4,000 to an 8,000th of a second shutter speed just to stop the movement in the boat. So the better your camera is, the better your high ISO is going to be. The older your camera is and the less quality your camera is, the worse your high ISO is going to be. But the way I shoot
Yes.
now, if I want the picture, I'm raising the ISO. And we just won't blow it up really big. So, you know, if I want the picture, I want the picture. And that's the good thing about high ISO right now is if we want the picture, we can get it now. So there's very few opportunities when we can't get the picture. So how high we raise the ISO is up to you. So the little boys across the table from me at the wedding, if I would have raised my camera up and said, "Oh, babies, look here," or something like that, it would have ruined it completely. So I just put the camera on the table, raised the ISO, got to a 60th of a second with the light meter balanced. I'm using the viewing screen on the back of the camera. And I'm not raising the camera up so they don't know I'm taking pictures of them. And I make sure that my focus point is up on the top, shooting across that iPhone from them. So you see all the thought that goes into this, but I want the picture. So if we want to raise the ISO now, we can raise the ISO, and that gives us the ability to get faster and faster shutter speeds. So fast shutter speed or slow shutter speed?
No,
Slow. Bonnie says slow.
Slow.
Slow or fast?
Oh, slow.
Slow. What you think, Tracy? What you think, Monica?
I mean,
Maybe a little faster because lightning is pretty quick.
yeah,
Lightning's pretty
because you
quick.
got so much of it.
Yeah, yeah. So why do you say slow, Bonnie?
you've got multiple strikes on the ground.
Yeah,
So it looks to me like the shutter was open for a while with the
Yeah.
lightning striking.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So with this photograph, I've got a 30-second exposure, 30 with quotation marks. So that's 30 seconds, half a minute. And during that 30 seconds, I'm just letting strike after strike after strike happen. Because if we used
Okay.
a fast shutter speed, you would just get a little bitty streak.
So
So-
just that this was set on a tripod and
A
just
set on
let it
tripod,
go?
exactly, exactly. Yep, yep. And it just stays open for 30 seconds, closes, opens for another 30 seconds, closes, opens for another 30 seconds.
It's a
Yeah,
gorgeous photo.
yeah, yeah. I love lightning. It's just so incredible.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, thank you. Fast shutter speed or slow shutter speed?
Fast.
Fast. Alicia, how fast do you think?
That I'm not sure.
Yes. What do you think?
15th of a second.
15th of a second? We
One-
used 500 on the whale.
1/500.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So what do you think on the gymnast?
She looks like she's flying, so let's say 100.
So this is 4,000th of a
Oh,
second.
wow.
Oh,
Way up
I was
there.
way off.
So we're on Santorini Island in Greece. We've got plenty of sunshine, more sunshine than we know what to do with. We got light like crazy. And I encountered this gymnast who's just flipping and twisting and doing all kinds of wonderful things. And I asked her, can I photograph her? And she says, yes. And so I raised my ISO to get myself up to 4,000th of a second. And even on a really, really bright sunshiny day, you're going to need to raise your ISO to get to 4,000th of a second because 4,000 needs a lot of light. And then I put my camera on rapid release. We'll talk about that next time. And then she jumps and I follow her and I completely miss every single thing she does because I don't know what she's going to do. So the better photographer, the more knowledgeable you are of the subject matter, the better photographer you're going to be. So then I had to ask her, would you please do that again? Never admit you didn't get it. Just would you do it again? And now I have a little bit better idea of what she's going to do and I'm more prepared for it. So the more you know your subject, the better photographer you're going to be. So this is about a 4,000th of a second shutter speed. So if you're in low light situations, don't worry about showing some movement. So the gymnasiums aren't lit really well, but by showing some blur in the flags, it kind of makes the picture look a little bit different. By having some blur in the dresses, then once again, it shows movement and it makes it look a little bit different. And in this case, we've got stage lighting. We've got lights from San Jose behind us. And so we don't need a super high ISO or even a really, really fast shutter speed. I need at least a shutter speed to show stop my audience, and you can tell how enthused they are to watch this show, you know? So I need at least a shutter speed that'll stop them. But then do I need to work on getting the dresses completely crisp? Maybe not.
Mm.
Tracy,
I said, is that also Costa Rica?
Costa Rica, yeah, San Jose, yeah, yeah. So we don't have to always have movement. I mean, stopping everything in the scene. Okay, so on the back of your camera, Bonnie's already noticed this. When you pull a picture up on the back of your camera, that one of the light bulbs that you all did earlier, you all get the light bulbs blinking at you, didn't you? Or have you ever seen things in your photo blinking at you?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. This is, you need this. This is important. So this is called your highlight indicator. Alicia, have you seen you've seen highlights? You've seen things blinking in your pictures?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is called your highlight indicator. You want that because when you look at your histogram and on you Canon users, you all will see your highlight indicator and your histogram in the same picture. So you pull up your picture and then you push your INFO button 1 times, 2 times, 3 times. And when you push your INFO button 3 times, you get to see your histogram, correct?
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Tracy,
Oh,
same
okay.
thing?
I've got my blinking, but I don't, my histogram is on a different.
There you go. So you probably push your display one more time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, there you got it. Good, 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 good. They all on the same screen. Okay, so this is what you want to look at after you have taken your picture to make sure you balanced your light meter in the right place. Now, picture of the cat, white cat on the couch. Let me walk you through and what your histogram is, by the way. This is a graph of all the colors in the photograph. If you converted the photograph to black and white, and then you started counting how many pixels you have of solid black all the way to solid white, it's a graph of how many pixels of each color you have. So that's what a histogram is. You want a histogram that goes all the way from the black corner to the right corner. So the black is on the left and the white is on the right. So you want a histogram that goes all the way across because that shows us we captured every tone. I don't care how many peaks and valleys that has because the peaks and valleys are just how many of those colors you have. But this is where your histogram can lead you to a properly exposed image. So in this photograph over on the side there, in the bookstore, the sun was coming in through the corner of the window. And I thought, you know what? I want that sun in that corner of that window, and I want it to be super bright up in that corner. So I turned the camera vertical, dial in my f-stop and dial in my shutter speed, put my focus point on the cat, see how the focus point is down on the cat's head. And then I took the picture. This is with the light meter balanced. And then when I looked at the picture on the back of the camera with the histogram and the highlight indicator showing, the area up in the upper corner is blinking where the sun is. The sun's always going to blink in a photograph, so don't worry about it. Same thing with light bulbs. They'll always blink. Don't worry about it. But the floor is blinking, the couch is blinking, and the cat's blinking. Anything that is blinking, there is no data there. There's no color. When you print it, no ink's going to hit there. It's pure white. There's nothing there. So you blew it. So I took the picture a second time, and that's this first histogram. And when you know you've blown it is because there's something going up that right-hand side y-axis. So that's your purest whites, is that y-axis over on the right-hand side. Take the picture the second time. And instead of balancing the light meter in the middle, I'm only going to go one step toward the negative. So I'm going to underexpose my photograph because my highlight indicator and my histogram tell me that this is too bright for the camera to handle. So I take my second photograph, click, look at it on the back of the camera. The corner of the window still blinks at me. That's okay. I wanted it to. Floor doesn't blink. That means I have the detail in the terracotta floor. Couch doesn't blink. I have the detail in the leather couch, but the cat's fur is blinking. So I need to take the picture a third time and not put the scale in the middle and not put the scale 1 stop underexposed, but put the scale 2 stops underexposed. So by underexposing this picture by 2 stops, that's 2 big hash marks on that scale toward the negative side. Then I got this cat's fur not to blink, the couch not to blink, the floor not to blink, but it's okay because artistically I wanted the corner of the window to blink. So sometimes, and you need to get yourself trained, and you will eventually get yourself trained to look at a scene and say, that's too bright. I bet you I'm going to have to underexpose. If you're wearing your sunglasses outside, I bet you you're going to have to underexpose. So you check that highlight indicator and you check that histogram, and both of them will lead you to the properly exposed image. Does that make sense? I know your brain's tired, but does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So in your homework assignment, you are going to put something on a stool. You're going to focus as close as you possibly can to that object. So you're going to get as close as you can to focus. It's all in your homework assignment. And then you're going to make sure that that object is 8 or 10 feet away from its background. And then you're going to start at the first f-stop I give you on your handout. And you're going to write down what your shutter speed is when you balance your light meter, and put your camera on a stool or a tripod if you have one. And then you're going to change your f-stop to the next one on your handout. And that'll change your shutter speed, and you're going to keep taking those pictures all the way through. If you do it right, if you balance your light meter every time, all the pictures will look the same light-wise, but what will change is how much of the background you see and you don't see. And then your second homework assignment is you're going to get a garden hose or a sprinkler, or you can use the kitchen faucet if you want to, or if there's a fountain in your neighborhood, go to there, or fountain in your backyard, and then stabilize your camera, put it on a stool or a tripod. And then you're going to start with that faster shutter speed I gave you, and you're going to slow down your shutter speed, and you're going to watch that water go from crisp to blurred. And once again, if you balanced your light meter all the way through, then you will, the pictures will look exactly the same, but what you'll notice is the movement of the water changes. If you get to the point on the water one where you can't balance your light meter anymore, that's probably because it's so bright outside. So we're in summertime now, or going into summer. So you might have trouble getting that one to go all the way down, but keep trying to work on it. Maybe don't go out in the middle of the day, go out maybe more morning or more evening, something like that. Okay. And then tomorrow I'm going to send you a recording of this class. I'm going to send you a link to my Dropbox. So if you want to upload your photos to my Dropbox, I'll show them next week and we'll talk about them. And you could tell me what trials and tribulations you went through trying to get those photos. It's fun. And it's always good to see what your homework is, whether it was a success or a failure. Remember, children learn by beating their heads against a wall and then making mistakes, and children learn. And that's how we do it in photography as well. Okay, questions for me?
I just need to remind you that I won't be here next week, so I'm gonna take the second half, I think, in June. Right?
Correct. So I will see you the second half in June. Yeah. Okay. And then remember also, if Pam's with us, we'll see her next week also. Okay.
So when you're on a tripod, it's gonna sound like a really dumb question, but how do you shoot without moving it if it's on a tripod?
You lock the tripod down, and that
Yeah.
stabilizes the camera so that you can get like the blurred water and things like that.
But you still just use the button on the camera and just try not to move it as you're.
Yeah. exactly.
I always wonder if that's something that I'm doing, if I'm just moving too much when I push the button.
And that's it, is you might be moving too much. Yeah, or might not have a tripod that's good. I'll talk about tripods next class, but it's in your handout. My favorite tripod is the Me Photo Globetrotter Classic. You can buy it at Best Buy, Amazon, costs $319, and it's a pound and a half, and it
Oh,
folds
wow.
up into a little bit less than three feet. It's about like this. Yeah. Super lightweight tripod, very, very sturdy. And we'll talk about that next class. But in case you want to buy one for the trip.
And then another question about shooting. So if you can shoot with your phone through your camera, do you have a feeling about those kind of apps? Do they distort the picture at all just by using your app on your phone to shoot through your camera?
You know, a lot of people do that with digiscoping for the birds. And I've always found it really hard. Some people can do it really well. I just find it really hard. But you've got to realize also it's a small little portion of your cell phone sensor. So your picture really is very small.
Okay.
I mean, it looks good on the internet, but you're not going to be able to do much else with it.
Okay.
Yeah. So try it when you're in Costa Rica. Put that cell phone up to that viewfinder or even the back display panel of your camera. And,
Oh, no. It's an app where it connects to the phone. And so you can take the picture just by pushing it on your phone.
And and that's not bad. There's a lot of people that do it. I think it's a really slow method of doing it.
Okay.
But, you know, if I were photographing something, you know, on the back deck at night and my camera was out there and I was looking through the back window, I would use something like that.
Okay. I just haven't tried to play with it at all. I didn't know how easy or effective it was.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not as easy as it looks.
Yeah.
But
No.
it can be done.
Taking pictures through the viewfinder with your phone, that takes, I'm not steady enough to do
Yeah.
that.
It takes a lot of practice. Okay. Any other questions?
Just as far as my camera goes, should I
Yes.
just set it back to the factory settings?
You can.
Okay.
I think it's in your orange menus. If you can't find it, email me tomorrow and I'll give you instructions.
Okay,
Okay.
appreciate it, Kathy.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, guys, you did well. Thank you very much. That was fun tonight. Enjoy your
Thank you.
homework. Have fun. And I will see you next week. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. Bye-bye.